great light prophesied by Isaiah in today's text is echoed in the first strands of John's Gospel. The light that brings peace, that saves the people from all that would extinguish it, has been there from the beginning. The Word is made flesh and dwells among us. The reign is now. Will we believe it? Will we continue to put flesh on it, embodying the peace meant for all humanity?
I believe in the light. I believe in the light that has come and is coming. I believe in the light. I believe in the light that has come and is coming.
Please repeat after me. We see the star rising.
We see the star rising.
We hear the glad tidings.
We hear the glad tidings.
We know we are not alone.
We know we are not alone.
Please join us for a moment of prayer. Holy One, we thank you for the glimpse we catch of your gift of peace on earth, even in the midst of fear, of challenge, of struggle, even when we aren't sure that goodwill among us can be found. That we might glow with His brilliance from the inside out. Help us face the pain of life and embrace the assurance that light is already here and always coming.
As Patty Matson has guided us into the lighting of the Advent candles, I invite you all in your homes to light the Advent candles at this time. So I invite you to light the first candle, the Advent candle of hope. And the second candle of love. And the third candle of joy, the pink one. And the fourth candle of peace at this time. And now may we join with the choir in singing this beautiful opening hymn, O come, Emmanuel.
Israel,
Thank you for joining me for this week's Children's Moment to Shine. This is the fourth Sunday of Advent. We're going to learn the last verse of this little light of mine. And I hope that over the weeks you have felt more hope and more love and more joy. And this week you'll feel more peace. And one way you might feel more peace is on some of those signs if you're having a little trouble or it feels hard to keep up, or you've done what some people do and you block out your video so no one can see you. I encourage you to just go ahead and try to do this anyway. And every good choir needs harmonizing and backup singers. So if all you can do is let your light shine, here's a couple ways you can do that. One is you can just do let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And you just do that through the whole song. Everyone else can do all the other motions. You just keep shining your light. The other way you can shine your light is just do this. Just be a candle. So you can shine your light like this through the whole song, and that'll be all right. Or you can do this. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All right, so let's review all of the various verses and signs, and then I will teach you the new verse. So remember that it's this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. So and then it's let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. The next verse is, I won't let anyone blow it out. I know that one has a lot of signs in it. And so please feel free to use the modification of just letting it shine or shining. So I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. So it's, I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. The next verse that we learned last week was how we bring more joy into the world by not hiding our light under a bushel. So hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. And I think this week's one way to bring peace is to shine your light out into the world. And so this is everywhere so everywhere is this sign. It's everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. So everywhere I go, just walk. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. So, I hope you have those. Have some fun with it this week and just do the best you can. And we want this to be a really fun and bring more peace and love into the world. So let's have some fun. Let's add Owen to the mix.
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Let's do the whole song.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
I won't let anyone blow it out.
I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
Hey, hide it under a bushel.
Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
Hey, everywhere I go.
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Oh, thank you so much for singing and signing with me through this Advent season. I hope that throughout the weeks you felt more hope, more love, more joy, and this week you feel more peace. For when we bring music and song out into the world, it does bring peace, and it allows us all to just really celebrate each other this Advent season, allowing everyone to shine their light and grow into their light. So thank you so much and have a wonderful week.
Our Old Testament scripture reading is taken from the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verses 2 through 7. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in a pitch-dark land, light has dawned. You have made the nation great, have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as those who divide plunder rejoice. As on the day of Midian, you shattered the yoke that burdened them, the staff on their shoulders, and the rod of their oppressor. Because every boot of the thundering warriors and every garment rolled in blood will be burned, fuel for the fire. A child is born to us, a son is given to us, and authority will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be a vast authority and endless peace for David's throne and for his kingdom, establishing it and sustaining it with justice and righteousness now and forever. May God bless the reading of his word. Amen.
We want to thank you, beloved congregation, for your support of the music program. It has been a difficult time for all of us trying to learn new ways of making music. Your support of all the arts in this church keeps an important tradition alive. I really want to especially thank our participants and our singers. I have just been overwhelmed with the number of people wanting to participate with the music, especially over the Advent season. We've just really had the whole choir turn out in basically full force and plus some coming to participate. When I looked at my inbox this week for all of the tracks that people submitted, I got over 100 submissions. So thank you, everyone. You're really supporting the church in an important way. That's the way I feel about, the way we're making music right now. It's not the same to not be singing together, but it's the next best thing when we can hear our voices sing together and everyone can enjoy it. So thank you all so much for your support. I want to give a shout out to Mark Miller, who wrote all of the anthems that we performed in the season of Advent. His music's really beautiful, and I thought that he's done a great job. So we will be reprising the theme anthem, I Believe, by Mark Miller, on Christmas Eve. For this Sunday, we are presenting to you the debut of a new anthem by Mark Miller. This one's called When Angels Sing. Indeed, throughout Advent, our choir angels have helped us keep music and keep music appreciation alive, and we are grateful.
Within each lifetime, an angel's voice is heard. Celestial sounds pierce time and space for just a moment. The breathless beauty of heaven's song reveals God's grace. Peace in our hearts, peace when angels sing. Peace be still and listen heart. Listen. Peace in our hearts, peace when angels sing. Peace be still and listen heart. Listen. When angels sing. Despite our sorrow, the dawn brings life anew, and raging storms begin to cease. For just a moment, the breathless beauty of heaven's song brings us peace. Peace in our hearts, peace when angels sing. Peace be still and listen heart. Listen. Listen. Peace in our hearts, peace when angels sing. Peace be still and listen heart. Listen. Listen. When angels sing. Angels sing. When angels sing. When angels sing.
Today's gospel reading is taken from the book of John, chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through the Word, And without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and the life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. A man named John was sent from God. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him everyone would believe in the light. He himself wasn't the light, but his mission was to testify concerning the light. The true light that shines on all people was coming into the world. The light was in the world, and the world came into being through the light, but the world didn't recognize the light. The light came to his own people, and his own people didn't welcome him. But those who did welcome him, those who believed in his name, he authorized to become God's children, born not from blood, not from human desire or passion, but born from God. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have seen his glory, glory like that of a father's only son, full of grace and truth. John testified about him, crying out, "This is the one of whom I said, he who comes after me is greater than me because he existed before me." From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. As the law was given through Moses, so grace and truth came into being through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. God, the only Son, who is at the Father's side, has made God known. May God add a blessing to the reading of today's scripture.
So, my friends, today is the fourth Sunday of Advent, and continuing with the theme of our season, today I'll focus on "I believe in the light, illuminating peace." And as you might imagine, I'll be focusing on what we mean by light and what we mean by peace and what we mean when those two things intersect. So let's start with light. Actually, Diane did a beautiful job reading John's Gospel, the first chapter, and Diane, both Dianes, the Old Testament reading from Isaiah was beautiful. They were both based, however, on the very beginning of the sacred texts that are the basis for the Christian faith. And it comes from the book of Genesis, when right out of the gate, the very first thing, remember this is prehistorical literature. And so in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called light. Now, of course, one of the messages from that early text was, how is it that out of chaos, order might happen? So this is ancient people's way of trying to make sense of the chaos in the world. And just make note of the way God describes light is good, and in the beginning it was formless and darkness. Just pay attention to that. I'll come back to it. So what else is good about light? Well, if you've ever tried to traverse a forest or anything at night with a great flashlight, I've been actually walking Finnegan at night, and I have a big bright headlight. I think it looks kind of nerdy, but Jeannie assures me that it's better than getting hit by a car. So I'm using that headlight at night, and it really helps me see and be seen. Of course, if you've ever done any navigating by the ocean, you know how important safety can be if you have a lighthouse, a beacon of light that can give you a point of navigation, help you to know where you are and avoid rocky places and be in safe waters. Then, of course, there are those practical things like the check engine light that comes on to let us know that our car might not be safe and that we need to pay attention and have it looked at. Then there's the practical thing of reading. It would be very difficult to read. Many of us enjoy that without light. And of course, there's also the artistic gift of light. And this time of year, it's very easy to observe the way in which light can bring us not only hope, not only messages of Christmas coming, but simply beauty. So the texts that were read earlier this morning, though, get beyond simply the ability for light to help us see or visualize things, to negotiate our world. For after all, we are animals created with eyes that see during the day better than at night. So it's no wonder that light, when God made it, according to the book of Genesis, it was good. So we could see what was around us, feel oriented, safe, able to negotiate what was happening around us. That's still true today. But the text from Isaiah gets to something deeper than the power or the benefit of lighting, because Isaiah is talking about insight. The people who have walked in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in pitch dark land, light has dawned. Now we're getting into light as a symbol for wisdom and insight and the presence of God and other ways of really perceiving as opposed to just seeing. And of course, the line from John's gospel, which is built on the idea from Genesis, along with Gnostic knowledge and wisdom from the time of the Greeks when he was writing, and says, what came into being through the word was life, and the life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not extinguish it or does not overcome it, as many of us heard from the Standard Revised Version for years. So light can have this deeper meaning to it. Now let's connect light and peace, since that's our theme for this week. Peace has layers of meaning. I'd say kind of the baseline for peace is the cessation of violence or injury. In other words, keeping the peace. That's sort of the basic building block of peace. But then there's the additional piece of freedom from oppressive thoughts or emotions. In other words, a kind of an inner peace. But there's also the piece of harmonious relationships between family, friends, and nations. So it's not just the cessation of violence. It's not just having being free of oppressive thoughts and emotions. It has something to do with other people in our lives. And of course, then there's another level, which I think is related to our sense of belonging to God, a state of tranquility or quiet silence and serenity. Now, peace from Jesus' Bible, we call it the Old Testament. It's actually the Hebrew scriptures, and it was Jesus' Bible. So the meaning from peace in the Old Testament scriptures is different. Let's see how. A state of wholeness possessed by persons or groups which may be in health, prosperity, security, or spiritual completeness in covenant. So the biggest difference between the previous secular or common ideas of peace, if you will, is this concept of wholeness, which the Bible brings us in fullness. And the wholeness gets really spelled out in the Old Testament. It's well-being for individuals and communities. And there are really some criteria that help us understand what is it, how is it that peace is established? Well, in the Old Testament, there's a connection between peace and righteousness. That means for there to be peace, you have to live an upright life. Righteousness meaning a good behavior that God would approve of, as opposed to wickedness and hurtful kinds of behavior. So peace and righteous behavior is connected. Peace and covenant is related too. Covenant with God and covenant with other people. Again, that's the promises that we live with, that is aware of other people's surroundings, including our own, the context in which we live. Peace is also connected with blessing. This could be the blessing of strength, of joy, of assurance. There are a number of ways that peace and blessing are connected. But if we are feeling a blessed life, oftentimes that's what contributes to peace. Finally, peace and salvation. That means that there's work to do for peace sometimes in terms of advocating those who need our help, advocating for those who may be oppressed or hurting, advocating simply for those who need love manifested by us, since God manifested God's self in that baby Jesus. This is what I would call the work required for peace. So, peace from Christian scriptures. Now, it's built on the Hebrew idea because Jesus' Bible was the Hebrew scriptures. But Jesus adds, as we all know, his own perspective and therefore lays the groundwork for peace from a Christian perspective that's a little bit builds on the Hebrew idea. So again, it goes beyond the absence of hostility. In fact, peace in the scriptures for Christians and the Christian tradition and the way of Jesus, peace is always working for reconciliation. And in the Bible, there's an emphasis on domestic reconciliation. That is reconciliation within families. We all know how difficult and challenging that can be, and yet it is a call from God to be aware that for there to be peace, you have to practice it at home, embody it at home, wherever that may be. There's also an emphasis on reconciliation between communities or even different groups of people. You know, St. Paul was so eloquent in one of his letters in the epistles, saying that, you know, there's no difference between Jew or Gentile, male or female, slave or free. They're all one. They're all united. They're all equal, all honored, regardless of what group they fall into. And for peace to happen, that has to be factored into what's going on in the world. And don't we know that, since right now in these sort of tumultuous times, peace feels very elusive because there is a lack of reconciliation and there is a lack of the awareness for peace to happen. All have to be considered and honored. The other clear message from Christian scriptures is that Jesus really is this embodiment of how it is that we are reconciled to God. And Jesus shows us how to be reconciled with God and with one another. And finally, there's a real connection in Christian scriptures, especially when the peace of Christ was used as a greeting. When early Christians would see each other, they would say, "Peace of Christ be with you," which is also why we use that phrase during communion. And the peace that is being referred to is something that connects with our heads and with our hearts. And I would add, DRB would add, that peace of Christ also connects our heart, our mind, and our body. Because if you're in pain or any kind of discomfort with your body, it's difficult to have a sense of peace with your head or with your heart. I want to give you an illustration of when it is that light and peace intersect, because the title today is, I Believe in the Light, Illuminating Peace. This is a picture of Clyde Miller, Reverend Clyde Miller, and Clyde had many different hats in the Rocky Mountain Conference. He was the conference minister for many years. I knew Clyde personally because he was the interim minister at First Congregational Church when I was serving as the associate, and the longtime senior pastor retired. And Clyde came on board, and Clyde was a wise, funny, deeply grounded in his faith, and was the first real teacher of what it means to be African American in the life of the church, and what it means to be white and to work with someone who's African American. And while I knew some of these messages from seminary and the African American professors I had and students, there's one conversation I had with Clyde that I will never forget, and I never forget every time I read the Gospel of John, the first chapter. And Clyde was the first one to say, be careful how you use the words light and darkness in your sermons, in your theology, in your teaching. And he went on to say, people with dark colored skin have had to deal with the unconscious bias that comes with the word darkness, and it's embedded in the Christian tradition. We saw it from the book of Genesis. God made light and called it good, and God separated light from darkness. But darkness tends to be associated with scary or bad situations. Now, that's not always the case, because some of us like darkness. Some of us like evening. Some of us like the quiet that comes with darkness. But the reality is, as you look more closely at the book of Genesis, I think the intent of the writer was simply for God to be separating light and dark for day and night, just acknowledging how it is that this is the way the world works. And yet, it is very subtle in that writing, because the darkness was covering the earth as a void and chaos, giving the very subtle message that darkness was, something was wrong with it, and it was scary, and it needed to be ordered. It needed to be straight, needed to be put in its place. Now, you may be thinking that this is really pushing the envelope a little bit with Black Lives Matter, but it isn't if you actually take the time to speak with people of African American descent and or people of color that have skin color that's not white, because they do experience things differently than we do. And here's just a quick example of the way in which language can be very subtle about reinforcing racism and issues of justice. So we all know what it's like to hear the word blacklist, to be blacklisted. We hear about there's a black mark on our record. Blackballed used to be a word that was used in organizations that would vote on whether someone should be a member or not. Then we all probably have used that phrase, black sheep of the family, and that's typically referring to the person who's the outlier, who's done something that the family doesn't approve of. And finally, we use the word blackmail as something that's taking advantage of another person. So you can begin to see, if you were coming from this and looking at these words from a person with dark colored skin, it would be easy to recognize the importance of using light and darkness carefully, so that darkness does not carry with it some kind of evil intent. And I think we as white folk can practice this and be aware of the way we use language as a concrete step of reconciliation, which is at the heart of the peace that Jesus taught. Reconciliation, not just cessation of violence, but an active moving toward the other, perhaps leading with, I've used some language and not even known that it could be perceived as negative. I hope that you'll think deeply about, as we move towards the celebration of Christmas, how it is that peace as reconciliation may be part of what God's calling us all to be. I want to leave you with this definition of peace, and I have my wife to thank for this, because one of the members of her church at Kairos sent it to her, and it's just a wonderful definition of peace. So it starts by saying peacemaking doesn't mean passivity. It's the act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice. It's the act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer. It's the act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of reconciliation and justice. It is about a revolution of love that's big enough to set both the oppressed and the oppressors free. Now, these powerful words were written by a fellow named Shane Claiborne. And he's written a book called Common Prayer, a Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals. And Shane practices what he preaches. He actually is one of the leaders of what's called the new monastic movement, and he lives in commune. And I don't expect all of us to become monks and to join the new monastic movement, and yet there is great wisdom, challenge, and comfort coming from Shane's definition of peace. So now it's time for us to have a response that is a collection in keeping with our theme of I believe even when. So Beth and I will share these responsively with you, this litany of belief. In times when humanity disappoints, perhaps when even our own thoughts and behaviors disappoint, it's an important act to call out, name, and claim the consequences of our wrongs. And in times of distress, it is a prophetic act to call out, name, and claim our belief in peace in the world. So I believe that humans seem to have a penchant for conflict, and
I believe that we are capable of learning nonviolent ways to negotiate difference.
I believe that we have perpetrated deep suffering upon each other, and
I believe that we can face up to the facts of privilege and work for equity.
I believe that our fear has told us that we must win in order to survive, and
I believe that winning at the cost of others can be called out and changed.
we believe even when we're discouraged.
We believe that even when we are discouraged, raising our voices for justice will offer peace.
And let us move into a time of stillness, of peace, of calm and tranquility by getting comfortable, taking a couple of deep breaths, being as still as you can, perhaps focusing on the Advent candle if you have it lit, or close your eyes if that helps you as we prepare for a time of prayer, listening to the choir as they invite us into a stillness.
Of all the obligation
So during this season of gift giving, we invite you to consider how Bethel Church has provided you with ongoing worship, discussion groups, book studies, and outside gatherings. Your financial gifts matter because they bring life to our core beliefs of our Christian faith, and our programs bring hope to many in our congregation and community. Our Advent season has emphasized the sources of hope, love, joy, and peace that can be found even in the midst of challenging times. We have celebrated the gifts of music and light. We have created virtual ways to prepare for God's gift of God's own self in Mary's baby Jesus. We could not have done this without your generous financial donations and your prayers. In a spirit of gratitude, let us share what we have with the church. You can mail a check to the church, give online, or text your donation. Now please join with Owen and the choir as we sing this Advent version of the doxology.
Believe, believe with hopeful heart. Believe, believe and shine your light. Believe because the song is sung. Because of what our God has done. Believe.
Our Carol of Resistance this week is part of the repertoire of Christmas songs that were created by people who endured brutal hardships as a result of African colonization and North American slavery. But though people of African descent were ripped from much of their cultural heritage, they maintained their heritage of group song, punctuated by West African rhythms and vocal stylings. Of course, the safest thing for oppressed peoples to sing about was the religious beliefs that, first forced upon them by their oppressors, later gave many hope in the midst of suffering. Go Tell It on the Mountain is probably the best-known African-American Christmas song, and the words seeker and watchman are thought by some to have been code words for those seeking freedom on the Underground Railroad. It was made popular by the Fisk Jubilee Singers in the 19th century as these college students, themselves freed slaves, traveled the country to raise money and awareness. They were turned away from hotels, railway waiting rooms, and even some churches because of their color. As we sing, let us honor them, honor all who have endured slavery and the continued systemic racism caused by slavery. Let us go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. Indeed, that the Prince of Peace that calls us to break the chains of oppression is born.
Go tell it on the mountain, over the hill and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. While shepherds kept their watching, or silent thoughts by night, behold, throughout the heavens there shone a holy light. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hill and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. The shepherds fear
So, my friends, I invite you to look at the candle of peace and hear these words. We wait for justice, but we do not wait to work for change. We wait for restored health, but we do not wait to work to heal. We wait for wholeness, but we do not wait to work at binding brokenness. We wait for peace, but we do not wait to work to eliminate hatred. And so, my friends, like bells ringing out the news that the light has dawned and shines on all people, fill the night left by sadness with a message of peace. Go into your lives humming the tunes that keep that peace alive in you and that spur you on in your work for justice and reconciliation. Raise your voices and repeat after me, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Thank you, Chad. Marvelous once again. So grateful to have your gift for music.